Welcome to Midnight Mystic Stories. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing more of the content you love. And be sure to comment below where you are tuning in from. Thank you and enjoy the video. It felt like just another night scrolling through Tinder, swiping left on guys who thought flexing their abs in the bathroom mirror was impressive. I'd been single for a while, and honestly, the whole dating scene felt like a joke. But then, as I was about to call it a night, I stumbled upon his profile. Jake. He had this magnetic smile, deep-set eyes that seemed to pierce right through the screen, and a bio that was simple yet intriguing. Let's make memories we'll never forget. I swiped right, half expecting nothing. But to my surprise, we matched almost immediately. The conversation flowed easily. He was funny, charming, and just the right amount of mysterious. He suggested we meet up for coffee at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, a place I had never heard of before. Part of me felt hesitant, but the more we chatted, the more I was drawn to him. The day of our date arrived, and I found myself standing outside the cafe, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. It was an old place, with creaky wooden floors and vintage furniture that seemed to have stories of their own. The warm smell of coffee wafted through the air, but it was the absence of people that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Only a few tables were occupied, and the dim lighting added a layer of eeriness to the atmosphere. I spotted Jake, sitting at a corner table, his back to the wall. He looked even better in person, with an effortless style that made my heart race. As I approached, I noticed something odd about him. There was a certain intensity in his gaze, as if he were studying me rather than just being present. I brushed it off as nerves and sat down, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. For the first half hour, we talked about everything, our favorite movies, music, and even our childhoods. But there was an undercurrent to our conversation that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He would ask me questions that felt too probing, like he was trying to dig into parts of me that I hadn't yet revealed. I mentioned my love for hiking, and he smiled, but there was something unsettling about the way his eyes darkened. Nature can be beautiful, but it can also be dangerous, he said, almost too seriously. I laughed it off, thinking he was just trying to be edgy, but the tension in the air thickened. I felt like I was being pulled into a psychological game I hadn't signed up for. As we moved on to dessert, he suggested we take a walk around the nearby park. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows that danced ominously among the trees. I hesitated for a moment, glancing at my phone to check the time. It was getting late, but something in his eyes made me want to say yes. The park was eerily quiet as we strolled along the winding path. The trees loomed overhead, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. He started to talk about his fascination with the human mind, how people can hide their true selves behind masks. I chuckled nervously, but his tone was serious, almost haunting. Everyone has secrets, you know. It's just a matter of uncovering them, he said, a strange glint in his eyes. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something dark. As we reached a secluded area of the park, I suggested we turn back, but he insisted on showing me a hidden spot he claimed was magical at night. Against my better judgment, I followed him deeper into the trees. My instinct screamed at me to turn around, but curiosity won out. We finally arrived at a small clearing where the moonlight spilled down like silver. It was beautiful, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. Jake pulled out his phone and suggested we take a selfie, but instead of smiling, he leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear, and whispered something I couldn't quite catch. I felt my heart race, and my pulse quickened. Suddenly, he stepped back, a strange grin spreading across his face. You know, I've always wanted to know what makes people tick, what makes them scared. My heart sank, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I took a step back, trying to assess the situation. Was he serious? Maybe we should head back, I said, my voice wavering. But he only laughed, a sound that echoed eerily in the stillness of the night. Just then, I noticed movement in the shadows. My heart raced as I turned to look, but there was nothing there, I felt like I was in a horror movie, the kind where the main character ignores all the warning signs. Jake continued talking about the thrill of fear, how it could fuel creativity and passion. His words dripped with something sinister, and I struggled to maintain my composure. I tried to redirect the conversation, asking him about his hobbies, but he brushed them aside. "What do you fear the most?" he asked, his voice low and serious. I felt trapped, as if he were playing a game I didn't understand. I hesitated, my mind racing. I didn't want to reveal too much, but I could sense that he was waiting for an answer. "I guess I fear being alone," I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, a look of understanding on his face, but I could see something darker lurking beneath. "Being alone can lead to some interesting thoughts," he mused, his voice dripping with an unsettling calmness. "What if you found yourself in a situation where you had no choice but to confront those fears?" That's when it hit me. I needed to get out of there. I stood up abruptly, my heart racing. I think I should head home. But before I could turn, he grabbed my wrist firmly, his grip surprisingly strong. "Not yet. We're just getting to the good part." In that moment, I realized he wasn't just some charming guy from Tinder. He was something darker, something dangerous. I yanked my arm free and took a step back. I could feel the panic rising in my throat. "This isn't funny," I said, my voice shaking. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a slow step towards me, his eyes narrowing. "You think you understand fear? You have no idea what it means to be scared, to truly feel it." I turned to run, but he was faster, grabbing my shoulder and spinning me around. My heart thudded in my chest, and I was ready to scream when suddenly, I heard sirens in the distance. The sound grew louder, and Jake's expression shifted from intense to irritated as he glanced over his shoulder. "Looks like our time is up," he said, a hint of annoyance in his voice. He released me, and I didn't hesitate to sprint away, my adrenaline kicking in. I dashed through the trees, the fear propelling me forward until I burst out of the park and onto the street. I didn't stop running until I got home. My heart felt like it was going to explode as I fumbled for my keys, slamming the door shut behind me. I leaned against it, trying to catch my breath, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. But as I sank to the floor, I noticed my phone lighting up with notifications. It was a message from Jake. My stomach dropped as I read it, the words sending chills down my spine. "Did you enjoy our little game? I'll be waiting for you next time. Don't think you can escape your fears that easily." The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just dealing with a guy from Tinder. I had stumbled into something far more sinister, and there was no escaping it. I had just moved to this small town, and the excitement of meeting someone new was tinged with an underlying unease. Most profiles were the same, smiling faces, cheesy bios, and lines about hiking or Netflix. But then I stumbled upon Zoe. Her profile was different. The photos were dark and moody. She had this brooding look that was both beautiful and unsettling. One picture caught my eye. She was standing in front of an old, creepy-looking house, its windows dark and foreboding. I swiped right, half expecting her to be just like the others, but she matched almost instantly. We started chatting, and I quickly learned that she was a local artist. Her words were poetic, filled with vivid imagery that made my heart race a little. There was something enchanting about her, but also a little off. She mentioned she loved exploring abandoned places, and that she often found inspiration in the eerie and the forgotten. I found myself drawn to her passion, even if it sent a few shivers down my spine. After a couple of days of chatting, she suggested we meet up. My heart raced at the thought, but excitement mingled with a sense of dread. I knew I shouldn't be so eager to meet someone I barely knew, yet there was something magnetic about her. We agreed to meet at a small cafe that had an artsy vibe, dimly lit with eclectic decor. As I sat there, nervously sipping my coffee, I glanced out the window, half expecting to see her approach. Finally, I saw her walking towards the cafe. She was even more striking in person, with long dark hair that flowed around her shoulders and piercing green eyes that seemed to look right through me. But as she stepped inside, the warmth of the cafe felt like it was sucked away. It was as if the air had turned colder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We talked for hours, and while the conversation flowed easily, I kept catching glimpses of something unsettling in her demeanor. She spoke passionately about her art, but there were moments when her gaze would drift, her expression turning vacant. I would ask her questions, and for a heartbeat, she would seem to be somewhere else entirely. As the night wore on, Zoe suggested we go to an old mansion on the outskirts of town that she claimed was haunted. The word sent a thrill through me, but it was tinged with apprehension. I should have said no, but the idea of exploring the unknown with her was too tempting to resist. We drove in her old car, the engine sputtering as we made our way to the mansion. The trees loomed around us, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers in the moonlight. The road turned to gravel, and soon we were bumping along a narrow path that led to the house. Even from a distance, it looked imposing, cracked windows, peeling paint, and a sagging roof. As we stepped out of the car, the air felt thick, as if something was pressing down on me. Zoe grabbed a flashlight from her bag and led the way. The door creaked as we pushed it open, and the smell of dampness and decay filled the air. Dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight, and for a moment, I felt like we had stepped into another world, a world that had been frozen in time. We wandered through the rooms, the beam of her flashlight illuminating faded wallpaper and broken furniture. Zoe was in her element, moving with an ease that belied the danger of our surroundings. I followed, captivated and anxious all at once. As she explored, she began telling stories of the house, how it had once been a vibrant home, filled with laughter, until tragedy struck. Her words painted pictures of sorrow and loss, and I found myself entranced by the haunting tales. But with each passing moment, I felt the tension building. There was a sense of wrongness hanging in the air, an unshakable feeling that we were not alone. I glanced around, half expecting to see shadows lurking just outside the reach of the flashlight. Zoe seemed oblivious, lost in her thoughts and stories, but I could feel the weight of something pressing down on me. We made our way to the second floor, where the floorboards creaked ominously under our weight. Zoe pushed open a door to what appeared to be a bedroom. The room was filled with broken furniture and shattered glass, but the most striking thing was a large, ornate mirror hanging on the wall, its surface grimy and cracked. Zoe approached it, her eyes lighting up with excitement. She seemed entranced, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. I stood back, watching as she reached out to touch the mirror's surface. That's when I noticed something strange. In the dim light, I could see reflections that didn't match reality, shadows moving behind her, flickering like candle flames. My heart raced as I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Suddenly, Zoe turned around, her expression shifting. There was a wildness in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was as if a switch had flipped inside her. She beckoned me closer, and against my better judgment, I stepped forward. The air felt charged, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Just as I reached the mirror, a loud crash echoed through the house, making me jump. Zoe's expression darkened, and she seemed to snap back to reality. She looked towards the sound, her face pale. I could see fear creeping in, and for a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope that I wasn't the only one feeling it. Then it all happened so fast. The door slammed shut behind us, and the temperature in the room plummeted. I turned back to Zoe, but she was no longer the girl I had met. Her eyes were wide, wild, and full of something primal. She looked at me, and in that moment, I realized she wasn't scared. She was exhilarated. With a sudden burst of energy, she lunged for the mirror, her fingers splayed against the glass. I felt a pull, a force dragging me towards her, and I fought against it, fear coursing through me. I stumbled back, the floorboards creaking beneath me as I tried to escape the suffocating atmosphere. Zoe's laughter echoed in the room, a sound that sent chills down my spine. It was no longer a sound of joy, but something darker, more sinister. I turned to flee, but the door wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me as I banged against it, but it felt as if something was holding it shut from the other side. Then I heard her voice, soft and mesmerizing. "You've come to join me," she said, and I could see her reflection in the mirror. But it wasn't just her. There were other faces, pale and twisted, crowding around her, beckoning me closer. In that moment, clarity struck me like a lightning bolt. I realized that Zoe wasn't just drawn to the house. She had become part of it, a vessel for something far more sinister. The tales she had told weren't just stories. They were a warning. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed against the door with all my strength, and it finally gave way. I stumbled out into the hallway, the air feeling lighter but still thick with dread. I ran down the stairs, my heart racing, the sound of her laughter echoing behind me, mixing with whispers that sent shivers down my spine. I burst through the front door and into the night, not stopping until I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking as I finally managed to start the engine. As I pulled away from the mansion, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Zoe stood in the doorway, her figure silhouetted against the darkened house, a haunting smile on her lips. But it was the reflection in the mirror that made my blood run cold. Faces pressed against the glass, their mouths open in silent screams, reaching for me. And as I tore down the gravel road, I knew I had escaped the house, but I was far from free. The chill of that night clung to me like a shadow, a reminder that some encounters are better left unexplored. It started as a quiet Saturday night, the kind where the world outside seemed to fade away, and the glow of my phone screen felt like the only light in the universe. I was swiping through Tinder, half-heartedly looking for some company to break the monotony of my life. I'd had my fair share of bad dates and awkward conversations, but I figured it was worth a shot. That's when I saw her, a girl named Mia with dark, captivating eyes and a smile that felt like it could light up the darkest corners of my mind. Her profile was simple but intriguing, with a few pictures of her in various locations that hinted at a free spirit. She loved hiking, photography, and had a quirky sense of humor that made me laugh. I swiped right, and to my surprise, we matched almost instantly. Her response was quick, and it didn't take long before we were deep in conversation. The connection felt electric, like we were two magnets pulled together in a universe that had conspired to bring us together. We decided to meet up at a coffee shop that was known for its cozy atmosphere and eclectic decor. As I walked there, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. I had spent the entire day thinking about what to wear, how to act, and what to say. I could already picture us laughing over steaming cups of coffee, sharing stories, and losing track of time. But the moment I stepped inside, an unsettling chill washed over me. The air felt thick, suffused with the smell of burnt coffee and something else, something sour that made my stomach turn. Mia was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. She looked just like her pictures, but something felt off. There was an intensity in her gaze that made me feel like she was looking right through me rather than at me. I brushed it off as nerves and sat down, forcing a smile. The conversation flowed easily at first, but soon I noticed her eyes darting around the room, scanning the faces of the other customers as if she were searching for something or someone. As we talked, I realized she was oddly fixated on the people around us. Her laughter felt forced, and there was a tension in her posture that made me uneasy. I tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, but her responses became increasingly cryptic. She spoke in riddles, weaving tales of strange occurrences and dark thoughts that sent a shiver down my spine. I laughed along, trying to keep the mood light, but I could feel the atmosphere shifting, growing heavier with each passing minute. The barista called out a name that wasn't mine, and I glanced back to see a man standing by the counter, his hands tucked into the pockets of his hoodie. He was watching us intently, his expression unreadable. I turned back to Mia, who seemed to stiffen at the sight of him. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, fear, recognition. I couldn't tell. After a particularly unsettling story about a hike that had gone horribly wrong, Mia suddenly leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. She spoke of the importance of watching your surroundings, of trusting your instincts. I laughed nervously, but the laughter felt hollow. The air felt charged, like the moment right before a storm hits. As we finished our coffees, I suggested we go for a walk in the nearby park. I thought maybe the fresh air would clear the tension that had settled between us. She agreed, but as we stepped outside, I noticed the man from the coffee shop was now following us at a distance. My heart raced as I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. Mia walked beside me, her silence now louder than any words. We reached the park, and I suggested we sit on a bench near the pond. The moonlight cast an eerie glow over the water, making it shimmer like liquid silver. Mia stared at the reflection, her expression distant. She seemed lost in thought, and I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The man had stopped at the edge of the park, still watching us. I tried to engage her in conversation, but her responses were vague, as if she were somewhere else entirely. The atmosphere felt suffocating, and I was beginning to feel trapped. I glanced back at the man, and my stomach dropped. He was getting closer, moving through the shadows like a predator stalking its prey. Panic surged through me as I looked back at Mia, whose face was now devoid of color. Without thinking, I grabbed her hand and pulled her to her feet, urging her to leave. She didn't resist, but as we moved, I could see fear etched in her features. I glanced over my shoulder, and the man was now only a few paces behind us. My heart raced as I tightened my grip on Mia's hand, urgency propelling us forward. We dashed through the park, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. I could hear him behind us, his footsteps steady and relentless. I could feel Mia trembling beside me, and I knew we had to get away. I turned down a narrow alley, the darkness swallowing us whole. We ran until we reached the other side of the alley, my chest heaving, breathless from fear and exertion. I paused, trying to catch my breath, but as I looked at Mia, her face was pale, almost ghostly. She was trembling now, and I realized she wasn't just scared. She was terrified. I reached out to touch her shoulder, to tell her we were safe, but she flinched away from my touch. The world around us felt distorted and surreal. The alley was silent, but I could still feel the weight of the man's presence looming over us. I turned to look back, half expecting to see him emerging from the shadows, but to my shock, he was gone. Just like that, he had vanished into thin air. In that moment, the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I turned back to Mia, and the look on her face sent chills down my spine. Her expression was blank, eyes wide and unseeing. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could utter a word, her lips curled into a slow, sinister smile. It was then that I understood. The fear I had felt was not just for myself, but for her. She wasn't just scared. She was the one who had been playing a game all along. The stories she told weren't just tales, they were warnings. I had stepped into something far darker than I had anticipated. Mia stepped closer, her smile widening as she whispered something that sent a wave of cold dread crashing over me. The alley that had once felt like a refuge now felt like a trap, and I realized too late that I was the one being hunted. The shadows around us grew thicker, and I could sense the darkness closing in, ready to swallow me whole. I had thought I was meeting someone new, but I had become part of a story far more sinister than I could ever have imagined. You know how it goes. You swipe left on a bunch of profiles, half-heartedly judging people based on one-liners and selfies. It was getting late, and I was half asleep when I stumbled upon a profile that made me stop. The guy's name was Ethan, and his photo showed him lounging in a sun-drenched park, wearing a goofy smile that somehow felt genuine. His bio was simple, just a few words about loving adventure and being spontaneous. I felt an odd pull towards it, like my gut was telling me to swipe right. So I did. We matched almost immediately, and my phone buzzed with a message from him. "Hey, want to grab coffee tomorrow?" A rush of excitement surged through me. It had been a while since I'd felt a spark like this. I quickly replied yes, and we set a time for the next afternoon. The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop, heart racing with a mix of nerves and anticipation. The place was cozy, with dark wood tables and the warm aroma of brewing coffee wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. I took a seat by the window, scanning the room, trying to spot Ethan. When he finally walked in, I felt a jolt of electricity. He was even more attractive in person, tall, with tousled hair and an easy smile that lit up his face. We chatted easily, finding common ground in our love for travel and music. But as the conversation flowed, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about him. He laughed a little too hard at my jokes and leaned in just a bit too close, making me feel both flattered and uneasy. As the minutes ticked by, I noticed his eyes darting around the cafe, as if he was looking for something or someone. When I asked about his job, he hesitated for a moment, a flicker of something shadowy passing over his features. "I'm in tech," he said, the smile faltering for a brief second. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just nerves. After all, who doesn't feel a little awkward when they're trying to make a good impression? That night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I even texted my best friend about how cute he was and how I couldn't wait to see him again. Over the next few days, we exchanged messages, and he suggested we meet for dinner. I was thrilled, thinking maybe this was the start of something special. The evening arrived, and I dressed carefully, choosing a simple black dress that hugged my figure just right. I felt butterflies in my stomach as I walked to the restaurant, the warm glow of the streetlights guiding my way. Ethan was already there, waiting at a table, a glass of wine in front of him. He stood up as I approached, and I noticed his eyes lingered on me just a bit too long. Dinner was going well, until he brought up his family. It was a casual mention at first, but then he started talking about his childhood home in a small town, how isolated it was, and how he felt like an outcast growing up. The way he described it sent a chill down my spine. He painted a vivid picture of an old house, surrounded by dark woods, where the trees seemed to whisper secrets. There was a hint of sadness in his voice, but also something darker lurking beneath the surface. I tried to steer the conversation in a lighter direction, but he kept coming back to his past, like it was a wound he couldn't help but poke at. There was a moment where he leaned in close, and I could smell a mixture of his cologne and something else, something musty, like earth and decay. I told myself I was being paranoid, but my instincts were screaming at me to get out of there. After dinner, he suggested we take a walk. The streets were quiet under the moonlight, and as we walked side by side, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me more than just a little too closely. I could feel his gaze, heavy on my back, and it made my skin crawl. Just as I was about to suggest we head back, he suddenly stopped and turned to me, his expression serious. "I want to show you something," he said, and before I could respond, he took my hand and started walking toward a darkened alley. The shadows seemed to swallow us whole, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. My heart raced as I followed him, but I felt an odd compulsion to see where this was going. The alley opened up into a small, deserted courtyard, and I could see an old, crumbling building in the distance. My pulse quickened as Ethan gestured toward it, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling excitement. "That's my family's old house. Want to check it out?" Something in me screamed to run, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I found myself nodding, curiosity getting the best of me. We approached the house, which loomed tall and ominous against the night sky. The windows were shattered, and the door hung crookedly on its hinges. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in around us, swallowing every sound. As we stepped inside, a wave of damp, musty air hit me, making me choke slightly. The floor creaked beneath our feet, and the faint smell of rot lingered in the air. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but Ethan was undeterred, leading me deeper into the house. He pointed out old family photographs hanging crookedly on the wall, their faces faded and ghostly. I could see a family that looked eerily similar to him, but the smiles looked forced, twisted. "See," he said, a strange note in his voice. This was my life. We wandered through the dimly lit rooms, and I began to feel trapped, as if the walls were closing in on me. I tried to joke, to lighten the mood, but Ethan's demeanor shifted. He became almost fixated, his eyes glimmering with an intensity that sent alarm bells ringing in my head. As we reached the end of the corridor, he stopped in front of a door that was slightly ajar. He turned to me, a strange smile on his lips. "This is my favorite room," he said, pushing the door open further. The room was dark, and I could barely make out the shapes of old furniture covered in sheets. Dust motes danced in the air, swirling around like spirits trapped in the gloom. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from behind me, making me jump. I turned around, heart racing, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at Ethan, His expression had changed. It was as if the friendly guy I had met was gone, replaced by someone else entirely, someone dangerous. I felt a rush of adrenaline and instinctively took a step back. The door creaked ominously, and I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing against me. "I think I need to go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He stepped closer, blocking my path, a grin spreading across his face that sent a wave of dread crashing over me. "You don't understand, do you? You're not leaving." Panic flooded my senses, and I turned to run, but he grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. I struggled against him, but he was stronger. I could feel the air thickening, the shadows closing in. Just as I thought all hope was lost, I remembered the small pepper spray I kept in my purse. With a burst of adrenaline, I reached for it, fumbling in my bag. I raised it, aiming for his face, and pressed the nozzle. The spray shot out, and he recoiled, releasing me. I bolted toward the door, heart pounding in my chest, praying I could make it out alive. As I stumbled through the dimly lit house, I could hear his shouts echoing behind me, but I didn't look back. I burst through the door and into the cool night air, running as fast as I could down the alley, my breath coming in gasps. I didn't stop until I reached the street, and even then, I kept moving, desperate to put as much distance between me and that house as possible. Once I reached a busy street, I finally stopped to catch my breath, my heart racing in my chest. I glanced back, half expecting to see him following me, but there was nothing, just the distant sounds of the city, normal and mundane. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something horrific. That night, I locked myself in my apartment, replaying every moment in my mind. I tried to convince myself it was just a bad date, that I had overreacted. But deep down, I knew that something was very wrong with Ethan. As I lay in bed, the shadows creeping into my room felt like they were alive, whispering secrets that I dared not unravel. The next day, I decided to unmatch him on Tinder, but as I scrolled through the app, my heart sank. His profile was gone, as if he had never existed. I felt a chill run down my spine, a sense of dread creeping back in. Maybe it was a coincidence, I told myself, but the feeling wouldn't leave me. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to move on, but I couldn't shake the memory of that night. I started seeing little reminders of him everywhere, his face in crowds, his laughter echoing in my mind. It was as if he had seeped into my reality, lurking just beyond the edges of my consciousness. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to take a walk to clear my mind. As I strolled through the park, I caught sight of a familiar figure under a streetlight. My heart raced as I recognized Ethan, standing there with that same eerie smile. He was watching me, and I felt a shiver of panic surge through my body. But then he did something unexpected. He raised his phone, and my heart dropped as I saw the familiar Tinder logo on the screen. "Hey," he said, his voice calm and collected. "I've been looking for you." I turned to run, but it was too late. The shadows closed in around me, and I could feel the cold, clammy hands of the darkness dragging me back into his world, one from which there would be no escape. It was one of those evenings where I felt both bored and restless, my mind wandering through a maze of potential matches, desperate for a connection that felt real. I swiped left and right, thumbing through pictures of smiling faces and clever bios. It was like a game, and I was determined to win. Then I saw him. Jake's profile was simple but intriguing. There was a hint of mystery in his eyes, a certain intensity that made my heart race. His bio was minimalistic, just a few words that hinted at a love for adventure and the outdoors. I swiped right without thinking, a flutter of excitement sparking within me. To my surprise, we matched almost instantly. We started chatting, and his messages were engaging, filled with witty banter and questions that kept me on my toes. I barely noticed the time slipping away, lost in the thrill of getting to know someone new. The conversation flowed easily, and soon we were exchanging numbers. Jake suggested we meet up for a hike at a nearby trail, one that wound its way through a dense forest. I hesitated at first. I didn't know him that well, and there was something about him that sent a slight chill down my spine. But the allure of adventure and the thought of fresh air pushed my reservations aside. After all, what could go wrong? The day of our hike arrived, and I found myself standing at the trailhead, nervous excitement buzzing in my chest. Jake was already there, leaning against his car, a wide smile on his face. He looked even better in person, with tousled hair and a rugged charm that made my heart flutter. We started walking, the sounds of the forest enveloping us. Birds chirped overhead, and the crunch of leaves underfoot was oddly comforting. As we walked, the conversation flowed effortlessly. He shared stories of his travels and adventures, while I felt myself opening up in ways I hadn't anticipated. But as we ventured deeper into the woods, the air grew heavier, and an unsettling feeling began to creep in. The sunlight dimmed as the trees thickened, casting long, eerie shadows that danced around us. I glanced at Jake, who seemed unfazed, his expression focused and intense. I tried to shake off my unease, convincing myself I was being ridiculous. After all, we were just two people enjoying nature, right? But every now and then, I caught him glancing at me in a way that made my stomach twist. It was as if he was studying me, analyzing my every reaction. We reached a clearing, and Jake suggested we take a break. I nodded, grateful for the chance to catch my breath. As I sat on a fallen log, I watched him as he moved around, collecting sticks and stones. He had an air of purpose, and I couldn't help but admire his determination. But as he gathered materials, I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck. The woods seemed to come alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a crow. It was as if the forest was alive, watching us. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the creeping dread. Jake returned with a handful of sticks, a glint in his eye. He started to arrange them in a circle on the ground. I watched, a mix of curiosity and apprehension swirling within me. "What are you doing?" I asked, but he didn't answer. Instead, he continued to work, his movements deliberate and focused. The atmosphere shifted, and I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. I stood up, ready to suggest we head back, but Jake suddenly turned to me, a strange smile playing on his lips. "Trust me," he said, his voice low and smooth. "This will be worth it." Before I could respond, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a small, ornate dagger, its blade glinting in the dappled sunlight. My heart raced, and I froze, confusion and fear flooding my system. "What are you doing with that?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. He stepped closer, his eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, something dark flickered behind his gaze. "You'll see. Just trust me." The words sent a jolt of panic through me, and I took a step back, my instinct screaming at me to run. But before I could turn, he lunged forward, the dagger aimed at the ground as he began to chant softly, a language I didn't understand. The world around us seemed to shift, the trees bending slightly as if responding to his voice. The air thickened, and I felt a strange pull, as if the forest itself was alive and aware. I stumbled back, my heart racing as I tried to comprehend what was happening. This wasn't a casual hike. I had unwittingly walked into something far darker than I could have imagined. Jake's expression was intense, almost trance-like, and I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. I turned to run, but before I could take a step, the ground beneath me shifted. The earth trembled, and branches cracked as if the forest was trying to keep me there. I could hear Jake's voice rising, the chant getting louder, echoing around us like a haunting melody. Panic surged through me, and I forced myself to move, pushing through the overwhelming fear. I darted past him, branches clawing at my skin as I sprinted deeper into the forest, the sounds of his chanting fading behind me. I didn't stop to look back, my heart pounding in my chest as I navigated through the trees, desperate to escape whatever dark ritual he was performing. The forest felt endless, each tree a looming shadow, and I could feel the presence of something watching me. I stumbled, falling to the ground, but I pushed myself up, adrenaline fueling my flight. I could hear the distant echo of his voice, a chilling reminder of the danger I had escaped. Finally, I broke through the tree-line, emerging onto the trail where we had started. My lungs burned as I gasped for breath, but I didn't stop. I ran toward the parking lot, my heart racing with the weight of what had just happened. When I reached my car, I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking as I tried to unlock the door. But just as I got it open, I turned to look back at the trail. I half expected to see Jake emerging from the woods, but instead, it was eerily quiet. I jumped into my car and locked the doors, my heart pounding in my ears. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something sinister. As I drove away, the weight of my experience settled in. I thought about Jake, the charm he had exuded, and the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface. Weeks later, I received a message on Tinder from him. "Hey, where'd you go? You left so suddenly. I thought we had a connection." My blood ran cold as I read his words. The charm was back, like a snake hiding its fangs. I stared at my phone, the reality crashing down on me. What had I nearly walked into? The thought lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, waiting for me, lurking in the shadows of the woods. The chilling realization hit me. It wasn't just a bad date, it was a warning. It was a typical Friday night, the kind where boredom hangs in the air like the last stale note of a pop song. I just finished a long week at work, and my friends had all bailed on our usual hangout. With a sense of restlessness creeping in, I decided to do what any 20-something would do. I opened Tinder. My heart raced a bit as I scrolled through faces, judging people based on nothing but their smiles and a few carefully chosen words. I came across a guy named Sam. His profile was simple but intriguing. A picture of him hiking, another of him with his dog, and a short bio that mentioned his love for horror movies and ghost stories. I swiped right, and to my surprise, it was a match. His message was quick. "Want to grab a drink tonight?" I hesitated for just a moment, but then figured why not? I could use some excitement in my life. We agreed to meet at a small bar downtown, one of those dimly lit places that had a reputation for being cozy, but not too crowded. As I got ready, I felt a mix of nervousness and thrill. What would he be like? Would he be as charming in person as he seemed online? Walking into the bar, the dim lights and eclectic decor wrapped around me like a warm blanket. I spotted Sam immediately. He was tall, with dark hair and an easy smile. As we chatted over drinks, I realized he had a magnetic presence. He spoke passionately about his favorite horror movies, and I found myself equally fascinated by his stories about ghost hunting trips he took with friends. The night rolled on, and the atmosphere shifted. The bar, once bustling with laughter and chatter, now felt quiet. The bartender had switched off some lights, casting shadows that danced ominously across the walls. I felt a tinge of unease creeping in, but I brushed it off, attributing it to the eerie stories Sam was telling about his adventures, how he once stayed overnight in a supposedly haunted cabin in the woods. As we continued to talk, I noticed something strange. Sam would occasionally glance around the room, his eyes darting like a predator searching for prey. It made me feel a little uneasy, but I convinced myself it was just the vibe of the night. We were in a bar, after all, and things sometimes get weird. After a couple of hours, we decided to leave. As we stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap. It was refreshing but also unsettling. I could hear the distant sounds of traffic, but felt isolated, as if the rest of the world had faded away. Sam suggested we take a walk down the nearby park path, which sounded like a nice idea until I realized just how empty it was. With each step, my mind raced. I was still buzzing from the drinks, but the eeriness of the surroundings made me hyper-aware of every sound: the rustling leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the crunch of twigs beneath our feet. Sam was animated, recounting another ghost story, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As we walked, I noticed how dark it had become. The streetlights flickered sporadically, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward us as if they were alive. Sam, still in his storytelling mode, suddenly paused and looked at me with an intensity that made my heart race for a different reason. "You know, some places hold onto the energy of the past," he said, his voice low. "You can feel it if you listen closely." I forced a laugh, trying to mask the tension in the air, but his gaze was unwavering, and I felt like he was looking right through me, as if he could see every fear I'd ever buried. Then, without warning, he changed the subject. "Have you ever thought about what happens after we die?" I was taken aback by the sudden shift. It was such a heavy question, and I struggled to find a lighthearted answer. I don't know," I guess I try not to think about it. But Sam didn't let it go. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear, and spoke of spirits lingering, unfinished business, and how some people never truly leave. The hair on my arm stood up. I could feel my pulse quickening, and the air felt thick. Something about the way he spoke made me feel like he believed every word. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was just part of his horror-loving personality, but a nagging feeling in my gut told me to be cautious. We continued walking, and I noticed we had ventured deeper into the park, where the trees loomed like sentinels, their branches twisting and turning in unnatural ways. The path ahead appeared darker, almost foreboding. Every snap of a twig made my heart leap, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, though I couldn't say by whom or what. As we rounded a corner, I spotted a small clearing with an old, decrepit gazebo at its center. It looked like it had been forgotten, overrun with weeds and surrounded by darkness. Sam seemed drawn to it. "Let's check it out," he said, the excitement in his voice sending a chill down my spine. Against my better judgment, I followed him. As we stepped into the gazebo, I felt an unsettling energy swirl around us. It was colder than outside, and I could see my breath in the air. Sam took my hand, and for a moment, it felt like we were suspended in time. But then he turned serious, his expression shifting from playful to intense. "This place has stories. They say if you listen closely, you can hear them." The tension was palpable. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but a part of me was tethered to the moment, intrigued yet terrified. Sam closed his eyes, as if trying to connect with something beyond the physical world. I felt a wave of panic surge through me. What was I doing here? Suddenly, a rustling noise shattered the silence. My heart raced as I turned to look, but there was nothing, just shadows dancing in the dim light. Sam's grip tightened on my hand, and he whispered, "Did you hear that?" Before I could respond, the shadows around us seemed to thicken, wrapping around us like a dense fog. I could barely see Sam's face, but I could feel his breath on my skin, warm yet chilling. I wanted to run, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this some sort of prank? Was he leading me into a trap? Then it happened. A low, guttural sound echoed from the depths of the gazebo, reverberating through my bones. It was a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard, something primal and ancient. Sam's eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw fear flash across his face. I yanked my hand away, adrenaline kicking in. I turned to run, but the darkness seemed to close in around me. Panic surged through me. I could barely breathe. I stumbled out of the gazebo, heart pounding, and sprinted down the path, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I reached the main street, where the lights felt like a lifeline. Gasping for air, I glanced back, half expecting to see Sam emerging from the shadows. But there was nothing, just the empty park, shrouded in darkness. That night haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me home, a chilling reminder of how quickly things could turn from exhilarating to terrifying. I deleted Tinder the next day, swearing off dating apps for good. But I couldn't forget Sam, the way he looked at me, the way he could speak of death with such fascination. Weeks passed, and I tried to move on, but I kept seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye, feeling a presence that was all too familiar. One night, as I lay in bed, I received a notification. My heart raced as I opened my phone to see a message from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Sam. I've been thinking about you. Let's meet again, somewhere quieter this time. I know a great spot." My blood ran cold. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned off my phone and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. I felt trapped inside my own mind, haunted by the night in the park and the unmistakable feeling that the darkness was still lurking, waiting for its chance to pull me back in. I was scrolling through Tinder late one night, the glow of my phone illuminating my cluttered room. I had just gotten out of a long relationship and was looking for some distraction. Swiping left and right, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Most profiles were the same, a parade of smiles, hobbies, and vague bios. But then I stumbled upon her. Her name was Sarah, and there was something about her photo that caught my eye. It wasn't just her striking features. It was the way she looked out at the world, as if she knew something I didn't. I swiped right. The match came almost immediately, and we started chatting. Sarah was witty and charming, the kind of person who could make even a mundane conversation feel electric. After a few days of texting, we decided to meet up. She suggested a small, secluded cafe on the edge of town, a place I had never heard of. It felt mysterious, and I was intrigued. The night of our date felt charged with anticipation, the air thick with an unnameable tension. When I arrived at the cafe, it was dimly lit, with flickering candles casting shadows that danced on the walls. The scent of rich coffee mingled with something floral, almost intoxicating. I felt a strange sense of unease creeping in, but I brushed it off as nerves. Sarah was already there, sitting at a corner table, her face illuminated by the soft light. She looked even more stunning in person, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something almost otherworldly about her. As we talked, I couldn't help but notice her intense gaze. It felt like she was peering into my soul, and I found myself revealing things I wouldn't normally share with someone I had just met. She was easy to talk to, and the conversation flowed naturally. But there were moments when I felt her attention shift, as if she was listening to something beyond our words. The cafe slowly emptied around us, and the atmosphere shifted. The once cozy ambience turned eerie as the shadows grew longer. I glanced at my phone. Nearly 2 hours had passed. I suggested we leave, but Sarah insisted on staying a little longer. I hesitated, but her eyes held a magnetic pull that kept me rooted in my seat. Suddenly, she leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. She began telling me about her life, her family, and the strange occurrences that had haunted her for years. I listened, captivated yet unsettled. She spoke of shadows that seemed to follow her, of whispers in the dark that called her name. With each word, the air felt heavier, and I could feel the weight of something unnameable pressing down on me. As the night wore on, a chill crept into the cafe. The barista had long since vanished, leaving us alone in the dim light. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator behind the counter, but it felt like the only sound in a vacuum. I glanced around, the once inviting space now feeling claustrophobic. The shadows seemed to lengthen, curling like fingers around us, and my heart began to race. Just when I thought I might suggest we leave again, Sarah's expression shifted. A flicker of something dark passed over her features, and I felt a cold sweat break out along my spine. She leaned back, her eyes narrowing. It was as if she was gauging my reaction, waiting for something. I could feel the tension in the air, thick like fog, wrapping around us. Then she pulled out her phone, showing me something on the screen. It was a series of photos, faded images of people, all eerily similar to her. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. They were portraits of young women, each one marked by a date written in the corner. My heart dropped as I realized the dates coincided with the deaths of each woman. I could feel my breath quicken, a wave of nausea rising in my throat. In a shaky voice, I asked her what this meant. Her smile was unsettling, a blend of amusement and something darker. She explained how she had been cursed, that she could see the souls of those who had died tragically, and that they clung to her, seeking resolution. I felt trapped, my mind racing through the possibilities. Was this some kind of sick joke? Or was she truly serious? The shadows seemed to lean in closer, and I could feel the temperature drop. I tried to stand, but my legs felt heavy, as if the very air was holding me down. Sarah's gaze remained locked onto mine, and I could sense a shift in her demeanor. She was no longer the captivating woman I had met. Something darker had taken over. I finally managed to break free from the invisible grip, my instincts screaming at me to run. I bolted from the cafe, the door creaking ominously behind me as I stepped into the cool night air. My heart raced, and I could hear the echo of my footsteps against the pavement. I glanced back, half expecting to see her shadowy figure following me, but the cafe was dark, and the windows were now pitch black. I stumbled to my car, fumbling with the keys as I tried to unlock the door. Adrenaline coursed through me, and my mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. I finally got in, slamming the door shut, and I took a moment to breathe. I told myself it was all in my head, that I had let my imagination run wild. I started the engine, the familiar rumble grounding me momentarily. As I drove away, the streetlights flickered ominously, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I hesitated before pulling it out. It was a message from Sarah. My stomach dropped as I read it. "I didn't want you to find out so soon. You're special to me." Panic surged through me, and I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop. I thought about the photos, the chilling stories, and the way her eyes had glinted in the candlelight. I felt sick, an overwhelming sense of dread washing over me. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat, my hands shaking. But then, a sudden thought struck me. What if she was right? What if there was more to her story? I knew that I shouldn't go back, yet curiosity gnawed at me like a hungry beast. Against my better judgment, I turned the car around, heading back toward the cafe. My heart raced with every turn, the shadows outside seeming to pulse with a life of their own. As I approached the cafe again, I noticed that the lights were on, casting an eerie glow. I parked, my palms sweaty against the steering wheel. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car. The door creaked as I entered, and the familiar scent of coffee filled the air. But the cafe was empty. I called out, my voice echoing in the silence, but no one answered. Then I noticed something in the corner of the room, a mirror reflecting the dim light. As I approached, I caught a glimpse of something moving behind me in the reflection. My heart froze as I turned around, but there was nothing there, just the empty space of the cafe. I turned back to the mirror, and that's when I saw her, Sarah, standing behind me, a smile on her lips that was both enchanting and terrifying. In that moment, I realized that the stories she had told me were not just tales. They were warnings. I was drawn to her in ways I couldn't understand, and the darkness surrounding her was something I had only begun to grasp. As she stepped closer, the shadows seemed to swirl around us, and I understood that I had unwittingly walked into a world far more sinister than I had anticipated. There was no escape now. I was part of the story, and it was just beginning. I never thought I'd find myself swiping through Tinder on a random Wednesday night, but there I was, boredom creeping in like a thick fog. The glow from my phone lit up my face in the dim light of my apartment, casting shadows that felt a little too dark. I'd spent way too long scrolling through the same old profiles, each one blurring into the next, when suddenly, there he was. His name was Jake, and his smile pulled me in like a moth to a flame. There was something magnetic about his eyes, deep and inviting, with a glimmer that felt just a bit off, like the last piece of a jigsaw puzzle that doesn't quite fit. But my curiosity got the better of me, and I swiped right. We matched almost immediately. A whirlwind of messages followed, bouncing back and forth like we were old friends. He had this way of making mundane topics sound intriguing, weaving tales that made even his coffee preferences feel dramatic. I was all in, convinced that I'd finally found someone who could keep me on my toes. After a few days, we decided to meet up at a local cafe, a cozy spot with mismatched furniture and a slightly unsettling collection of vintage dolls lining the shelves. The kind of place that feels like it has a secret. The night of our date, I arrived early, the buzz of excitement mixed with a hint of nervousness swirling in my stomach. I settled into a corner table, tapping my foot impatiently as I watched the door. When Jake walked in, it was like the world around me faded. He looked even better in person, tall, with tousled hair and that same charming smile. He made his way over, and we quickly fell into conversation, the world outside melting away. The cozy atmosphere began to feel oddly claustrophobic as the minutes turned into hours. Jake's stories began to shift from funny anecdotes to darker tales that sent a chill through me. He talked about his family, how they had always been a bit strange, living on the edge of town in an old, creaky house that seemed to breathe. He described the woods behind his home, where he'd spend hours exploring, always feeling like something, or someone, was watching him. I laughed it off, but deep down, a thread of unease wove its way into my thoughts. It was entertaining at first, but the more he spoke, the more I felt like I was being drawn into a web. As the night wore on, I started noticing odd things. The way he'd glance over my shoulder, his smile slightly too wide, as if he were expecting something, or someone, to emerge from the shadows. The cafe, once warm and inviting, now felt suffocating. The dolls on the shelves seemed to stare, their eyes following our conversation. I excused myself to the restroom, splashing cold water on my face, trying to shake off the creeping dread that clung to me. When I returned, Jake was gone. My heart raced as I scanned the room, but he was nowhere in sight. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe he'd stepped outside for a moment, but the longer I sat there, the more the air thickened with an unsettling tension. I finally decided to leave, stepping into the cool night air, hoping the chill would clear my head. Walking to my car, I glanced at my phone. No messages from Jake. I was about to call it a night when I heard a rustling sound behind me. I turned, heart pounding, half expecting to see him rushing to catch up. Instead, the street was empty, the shadows dancing with the flickering streetlights. I shook my head, convincing myself my mind was playing tricks on me. Driving home, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. A message from Jake. Sorry, had to step out. Want to meet again. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the screen. There was a part of me that wanted to say yes, to give him another chance, but another part screamed to run far away. I eventually replied, keeping it casual, suggesting we could chat again later. As soon as I got home, I locked the door behind me, my heart still racing. I tried to shake off the unease, but sleep eluded me. The shadows in my room felt alive, whispering secrets I couldn't quite grasp. The next day, I received another message from Jake. He asked if I wanted to see his family's house, claiming it was a unique experience. My gut twisted at the thought, but curiosity got the better of me. I agreed, the promise of adventure pulling me in. As I drove to the outskirts of town, the trees thickened, closing in around me like a tunnel. The house came into view, an old Victorian that looked like it had been plucked from a horror movie. It loomed over me, its windows dark and foreboding. Jake was waiting outside, grinning as he waved me over. His excitement felt infectious, and I found myself smiling back, even as a shiver ran down my spine. The inside of the house was just as creepy as I expected. Dust hung in the air, and the floor creaked with every step. Jake led me through the rooms, sharing stories that blurred the line between reality and fiction. The walls seemed to lean in, listening to his tales, while the shadows danced in the corners, almost alive. In one room, he stopped, staring at a faded photograph on the wall. It was an old family portrait, and his expression shifted. I could see a flicker of something dark in his eyes, a shadow that made my skin crawl. He turned to me, smiled back in place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. As we moved to the basement, the air grew heavy. The stairs creaked ominously beneath us, and I hesitated at the top, feeling an unnatural chill. Jake urged me on, his enthusiasm almost manic. I stepped down, the dim light barely illuminating the space. The walls were lined with odd trinkets, old toys, and remnants of a lifelong past. A sense of dread washed over me, and I couldn't help but glance back, wondering if I was making a grave mistake. Suddenly, Jake moved closer, a wild look in his eyes. He started explaining how his family had always had a connection to the supernatural, how they communicated with spirits. My heart raced, the atmosphere thickening around us. I felt trapped, like a fly in a web, and I wanted to scream. As he continued, his voice dropped to a whisper, almost conspiratorial, and I realized he was no longer talking about the past. He was speaking directly to me, his words laced with a sinister undertone. Just then, a loud crash echoed from upstairs. I jumped, adrenaline coursing through me. Jake's smile widened, an unsettling glint in his eyes. I felt the walls closing in, the shadows growing darker. Panic surged through me as I turned to run, racing up the stairs, heart pounding in my ears. But as I reached the top, the front door slammed shut with a deafening thud. I was trapped. Jake's laughter echoed behind me, sending a chill down my spine. I whipped around, my breath coming in ragged gasps. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, the shadows wrapping around him like a cloak. His expression had shifted, the warmth replaced by something dark and twisted. The stories were no longer tales, they were a warning. With a surge of adrenaline, I bolted toward the nearest window, desperate to escape. I pushed against the glass, but it wouldn't budge. I turned back to see Jake advancing, his eyes glinting with an intensity that terrified me. I could feel the weight of the house pressing down, the walls pulsing with a life of their own. In that moment, I realized the truth. Jake wasn't just strange. He was part of something far more sinister. The stories he told weren't just family legends. They were a lure, a trap. The house wasn't just old. It was alive, feeding off fear. And I had walked straight into its mouth. With one last desperate effort, I flung myself at the door, managing to pry it open just enough to slip through. I raced into the night, the forest swallowing me whole as I ran. The trees loomed like sentinels, watching as I fled. I didn't stop until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, barely able to breathe. As I drove away, heart racing and mind spinning, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The house stood silent, but I could have sworn I saw a shadow in the window, watching me leave. I never opened the Tinder app again, the memory of that night etched into my mind. Some doors are better left closed, and some matches are never meant to ignite. I had never been the type to use dating apps. The whole idea felt a bit off to me, like trying to find a soulmate in a candy store. But after my last relationship crumbled into nothing more than a pile of awkward texts and half-hearted apologies, I figured why not? Swiping through faces became a routine, a digital gallery of potential connections. Most of them were forgettable, just faces, names, and the occasional cheesy pickup line. But then I stumbled upon Elena's profile. Her pictures were different, intense eyes, a smirk that hinted at mischief, and a bio that was all about her love for the macabre. "Let's explore the dark side together," it read. I felt a spark of interest. It wasn't just the allure of her looks. It was the mysterious vibe she projected. We matched, and that was the beginning of a series of messages that danced around the usual small talk. She had a rhythm to her words, a way of weaving thoughts that pulled me in deeper. After a week of back-and-forth banter, we decided to meet. She suggested a little-known cafe on the outskirts of town, known for its dim lighting and eclectic decor. It was the kind of place that felt like a secret, tucked away from the bustling streets. The anticipation made me nervous, the kind of electric buzz that fills your stomach before facing something unknown. On the day of the date, I arrived early, the place shrouded in an almost eerie silence. The soft glow of fairy lights hung from the ceiling, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. I ordered a coffee, my hands trembling slightly as I took a seat by the window. I could see the street outside, the world moving on while I waited for her. When she finally walked in, I felt the air shift. Elena was even more striking in person, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her makeup accentuating those captivating eyes. She strolled toward me with an air of confidence that was almost disarming. We exchanged pleasantries, and as we settled into our conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something beneath the surface, a depth to her that was both alluring and unsettling. As we talked, she shared stories that sent a chill down my spine, tales of haunted houses, urban legends, and her fascination with the darker side of humanity. I found myself entranced, captivated by her words, yet a voice in the back of my mind urged caution. It was as if she was testing the waters, gauging my reactions to each story, watching how I absorbed the darkness she reveled in. The cafe grew quieter as the evening wore on, shadows stretching across the walls. I could feel the tension building, an unspoken connection simmering just beneath the surface. But just when I thought I could let my guard down, she leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. She spoke of her obsession with fear, how it consumed her in ways that were both exhilarating and terrifying. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and I could have sworn I saw a figure dart past the window. My heart raced, but I brushed it off as my imagination. The night continued, but the atmosphere shifted. It felt as if we were the only two people in a world that had fallen silent, and the shadows began to loom larger, pressing in on us. Elena suggested we go for a walk, and I found myself agreeing against my better judgment. The streets were eerily quiet, the moonlight casting an otherworldly glow over everything. We wandered into a nearby park, the trees towering above us, their branches swaying gently in the wind. The shadows danced around us, and I felt an unsettling thrill as Elena pointed out things hidden within the darkness. Strange shapes, rustling leaves, a distant sound that echoed through the stillness. We reached a secluded area, the trees forming a natural barrier that made the world feel even smaller. The air was thick with tension, and as we stood there, she turned to me, her eyes glinting with something that sent a shiver down my spine. "Do you believe in the supernatural?" she asked, her voice low. I hesitated, feeling the weight of her gaze. I wasn't sure if she was serious or if this was just part of her twisted charm. Before I could respond, she stepped closer, her breath warm against my skin as she began to recount a tale so vivid it felt real. It was about a girl who had gone missing in the very park we stood in, lost to the darkness without a trace. As she spoke, the atmosphere thickened. I could almost feel the weight of the girl's presence wrapping around us, the past mingling with the present. The shadows seemed to stretch and shift, and I fought the urge to look around, to check if we were alone. But then I heard it, a rustling in the bushes nearby. My heart stopped, and I glanced over, half expecting to see a figure emerge from the shadows. I turned back to Elena, but she was gone, vanished into the darkness. Panic surged through me. I called her name, my voice trembling, but the only sound that met my ears was the echo of the wind. I stumbled through the trees, searching for her, my pulse racing. The park felt alive, the shadows shifting, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. I felt the weight of something unseen, pressing against me, urging me to turn back. But I pressed on, calling out her name, desperation creeping in. Then I saw her, a silhouette standing at the edge of the park, backlit by the moon. Relief washed over me, and I rushed toward her. But as I got closer, I felt a chill settle in my bones. This wasn't the Elena I had come to know. Her posture was rigid, almost unnatural, as if she were a marionette with its strings cut. I slowed down, uncertainty creeping back in. "Elena," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't respond, just stood there, staring into the darkness. I reached out, but as I touched her shoulder, she turned her head slowly. Her eyes were no longer the vibrant orbs I had admired. They were hollow, devoid of life. In that moment, I realized this was not the girl I had been talking to. This was something else entirely, something that had taken her place. The air grew thick with dread as I stumbled backward, my heart racing. She smiled then, a twisted grin that sent ice through my veins. Before I could run, the ground beneath me shifted, and I felt a pull, as if the earth itself was alive and hungry. I turned and bolted, racing through the trees, branches clawing at my skin, the shadows closing in. I could hear whispers now, a cacophony of voices that echoed around me, urging me to stop, to join them in the darkness. But I couldn't. I pushed forward, fueled by fear, until I finally broke free from the park and burst onto the street, gasping for breath. The night felt different now, charged with an energy I couldn't comprehend. I glanced back, half expecting to see her chasing after me, but the park lay still, silent as if nothing had ever happened. I made my way home, the shadows trailing behind me, a reminder of what I had encountered. I knew I would never swipe right again, never look for connection in the depths of a screen. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt the weight of those hollow eyes haunting me. I had ventured into a world I couldn't understand, and now I was forever marked by the darkness I had sought to explore. I remember the first time I swiped right on Tinder. My friends had been pushing me to explore the app, convinced that I'd meet someone amazing and finally ditch my hermit lifestyle. I was skeptical, but the thrill of connecting with someone new felt like an adventure I couldn't pass up. After a few mindless swipes, I stumbled upon a profile that caught my eye. His name was Alex. His photos showed him hiking in the mountains, enjoying sunsets by the beach, and even playing guitar by a campfire. He seemed genuine, and his bio was simple yet intriguing. He loved nature, music, and had a passion for photography. I felt an instant connection, the kind that makes your heart race a little faster. We chatted for a few days, and I found myself drawn to his stories. He spoke about his love for the outdoors, how he found solace in solitude, and how he often explored abandoned places. I found myself picturing us wandering through eerie, forgotten buildings, sharing secrets and stolen glances. It was exciting, yet a little unsettling, but I figured that was just part of the thrill. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he suggested we meet for coffee at a quaint little cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. I was both nervous and excited, imagining all the possibilities that lay ahead. The day of our meeting, I dressed carefully, wanting to look both casual and cute. I arrived early and settled into a cozy corner, sipping my coffee while stealing glances at the door. When he walked in, I felt a rush. He was even more handsome than his pictures, with tousled dark hair and a warm smile that felt familiar. We chatted easily, sharing stories about our lives, but there was a subtle intensity in his gaze that made me feel like he was seeing right through me. As the evening wore on, he suggested we take a walk in a nearby park. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden hue over everything, and I felt a spark of excitement at the idea. The park was serene, with the rustling leaves creating a soft melody around us. We wandered along the winding paths, talking about our favorite places in the world. Then he led me to a secluded area, shrouded by trees, where an old stone bench sat beneath a canopy of twinkling stars. It felt almost magical, but there was something about the atmosphere that felt off. I brushed it aside, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. He pulled out his camera, eager to capture the moment, and I posed playfully, laughing as he snapped pictures. But then something shifted. The air grew colder, and the laughter faded as he turned serious. He began sharing a story about his last adventure, an exploration of an abandoned asylum on the outskirts of the city. The way he spoke about it sent chills down my spine. He described the eerie silence inside, the peeling paint on the walls, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. I felt a strange mix of fear and fascination, caught in the web of his words. As he spoke, I noticed his eyes darkening, a shadow passing over his features. It was as if he was reliving the experience, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I wanted to tell him to stop, to change the subject, but I was frozen, caught between curiosity and dread. When he finished, there was a heavy silence. I forced a laugh, trying to lighten the mood, but it fell flat. Suddenly, I became hyper-aware of our surroundings. The rustling leaves sounded like whispers, and the shadows between the trees seemed to thicken, closing in on us. I glanced around, the unease settling deeper into my bones. I suggested we head back, but he was reluctant, insisting that we explore a little longer. He mentioned he knew a hidden spot nearby that was even more incredible. Despite my growing apprehension, a mix of intrigue and fear pulled me to agree. As we walked deeper into the park, the trees grew denser, the path less defined. I felt a strange pull, like the forest was alive, watching us. He led me to a clearing, and my stomach dropped. In the center stood an old, dilapidated structure that looked like it had been forgotten by time. The walls were covered in vines, and the roof sagged as if it might collapse at any moment. I felt a surge of panic as he suggested we go inside. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but part of me was still captivated, wanting to know what lay within. He stepped inside, urging me to follow. The air was stale, thick with dust and secrets. The dim light filtering through cracked windows cast eerie shadows on the walls. I felt like we had crossed a threshold into another world, one that was both thrilling and terrifying. He snapped pictures, his excitement palpable, while I lingered near the entrance, my heart racing. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was wrong, but I couldn't ignore the oppressive silence that enveloped us. As he explored, I noticed strange markings on the walls, symbols that seemed to pulse with energy. I felt drawn to them, my curiosity battling against my instinct to flee. He called me over, his voice echoing in the empty space, but I hesitated. Just then, I heard a noise, a faint whisper that sent a chill down my spine. I turned sharply, scanning the dark corners of the room, and that's when I saw it, a figure lurking in the shadows. Panic surged through me as I blinked, and the figure vanished, leaving only shadows dancing on the walls. I called out to Alex, but he was too engrossed in his photography to notice my growing fear. I felt trapped, like the walls were closing in. I took a step back, my foot crunching on a piece of debris, and he turned, finally noticing my unease. But instead of concern, there was something else in his eyes, something darker. I felt a wave of dread wash over me as I realized he wasn't the person I thought he was. The warmth that had drawn me in was gone, replaced by an unsettling intensity. Without thinking, I turned and bolted for the exit, my heart pounding in my chest. I sprinted through the twisted corridors, desperation fueling my escape. I could hear him calling after me, but I didn't stop. I burst through the doorway and into the night, gasping for breath. The park felt different now, the moonlight casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me. I glanced back, half expecting him to follow, but he was nowhere in sight. I stumbled through the trees, my mind racing with confusion and fear. I finally made it back to the main path, my legs shaky but determined to get to safety. As I reached the edge of the park, I fished my phone out of my pocket, hands trembling as I tried to call a ride. That's when I heard it again, his voice, calm and eerie, echoing through the trees. "You can't escape me." The words sent a chill down my spine. I looked around frantically, but the park was empty. There was no sign of him, yet I could feel his presence, lurking just out of sight. I fumbled with my phone, my heart racing as I tried to dial. Suddenly, the screen flickered, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I glanced down, realizing with horror that his fingers had wrapped around my heart, squeezing tightly. In that moment, everything went black. The last thing I remember was the feeling of being pulled into the shadows, the weight of his gaze smothering me as I vanished into the darkness. The world around me faded, leaving only silence and the cold grip of fear. And in that silence, I understood. I had become just another story, just another adventure lost in the depths of the unknown. It all started with a swipe. One night, sitting on my couch in my dimly lit apartment, I was bored out of my mind, scrolling through Tinder. It was a mindless habit, something to fill the void of endless evenings. I matched with a girl named Jess. Her profile was simple, a cute smile, a few travel pics, and a mention of her love for horror movies. I was intrigued. There was something about her that felt different from the usual matches. We chatted back and forth, and she seemed down to earth, sharing random tidbits about her life and preferences. She had a way of making even the most mundane topics sound interesting. As we talked, the atmosphere shifted in my small space. The shadows cast by my lamp seemed to deepen, and the dim light flickered slightly, almost as if I were in one of those horror films she claimed to adore. I dismissed it as my imagination getting the better of me. Jess suggested we meet up for coffee, and I agreed. We decided on a small cafe tucked away in a back alley, a spot I had never been to but sounded cozy enough. The place was one of those hidden gems, with mismatched furniture and an old jukebox quietly playing classic tunes in the corner. When I arrived, the air was thick with the smell of roasted beans and something sweet baking in the oven. It felt warm, inviting. Yet a tiny voice in the back of my head whispered that something was off. When Jess walked in, my heart raced. She looked even better in person, her vibrant green eyes shining under the soft lights. We hugged, and the moment felt electric. As we settled into our seats, I noticed the cafe was nearly empty, which added a strange intimacy to our meeting. We talked and laughed, and I found myself losing track of time. I didn't want the evening to end. After our coffee, we decided to take a walk. It was getting dark, and the lamps lining the streets flickered like they were alive. Jess suggested a nearby park, and I agreed, although a part of me felt uneasy. The park was secluded, surrounded by old trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. As we walked along the path, I could hear the crunch of leaves beneath my feet, and the chill of the night air sent a shiver down my spine. We stopped to sit on a bench, and for a brief moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Jess leaned back, looking at the stars, and I couldn't help but admire her profile. The way her hair danced in the breeze made my heart race. But beneath the charm of the moment, I felt a sense of foreboding creeping in. Jess began talking about her love for horror stories, how they often reflect the darkest parts of human nature. I listened intently, but my mind was wandering. I glanced around, the shadows of the trees seeming to stretch longer than they should. The park felt eerily quiet, as if the world had hushed itself just for us. As she spoke, I noticed her eyes were fixed on something in the distance. I turned to see a figure standing a few yards away, partially hidden by the trees. It was too dark to make out any details, but the figure was still watching us. My stomach dropped. Jess continued talking, her voice steady, but I could sense an undercurrent of tension in the air. I tried to shake it off, attributing it to my overactive imagination, but the figure remained there, unmoving, as if it was waiting for something. A few minutes passed, and Jess finally noticed my distraction. I tried to brush it off, but she looked concerned. She stood up, pulling me with her. We needed to leave. As we walked back towards the park entrance, it felt like we were being followed. I glanced over my shoulder, but the figure had vanished. The night seemed to close in around us, and I could hear the rustling of leaves, the distant hooting of an owl, and the pounding of my own heart. When we reached the edge of the park, Jess suggested we call it a night. I agreed, relieved to be leaving that unsettling place behind. We walked back to my car, and the tension between us shifted. I could feel her energy change as we approached the vehicle. It was as if the weight of the night was settling between us, thickening the air. I drove her home, the streets illuminated by the occasional street lamp. Jess was quiet, lost in thought, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced at her, her expression unreadable. She seemed distant, almost as if she were somewhere else entirely. When we arrived at her building, she thanked me for the evening, but there was a strange finality in her tone. I felt compelled to ask her if she wanted to hang out again, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I simply nodded and watched as she walked away, her silhouette fading into the shadows of the entrance. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I checked my phone repeatedly, hoping for a message from Jess, but nothing came. I tossed and turned in bed, every creak of my apartment echoing through the stillness. I finally drifted off, but my dreams were haunted by the figure in the park and the weight of Jess's gaze. The next day, I woke up with the sun streaming through my window, feeling hopeful. Maybe it was all in my head. I made coffee and decided to text Jess. I shot her a message, asking if she'd like to grab dinner later in the week. I hit send and waited, my heart racing with anticipation. Hours passed with no reply. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself she was busy. But as the day turned into evening, anxiety crept back in. I decided to check her social media, hoping to see something that might ease my mind. But when I looked her up, I found her profile had vanished. It was as if she had never existed. Panic set in as I searched for her online. I scrolled through her previous posts, trying to find any clue. The more I looked, the more I realized how little I actually knew about her. It was strange, but something didn't sit right. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, the edges of my mind fraying. Days turned to weeks, and I searched for Jess everywhere, asking friends if they'd heard from her. But she was a ghost. I visited the cafe, but the staff didn't recognize her. It was as if she had never walked into my life at all. One night, I found myself back at that park, the shadows creeping in around me once more. I sat on that same bench, the air thick with memories. I thought I was losing my mind until I noticed a figure in the distance. My heart raced as I recognized the silhouette. It was Jess, standing still like before, only this time she was staring directly at me. I felt a chill run down my spine as I tried to approach her. As I got closer, my heart pounded louder, but she didn't move. I reached out, desperate for answers, but just as I was about to call her name, she smiled, and the world around me shattered. The park faded away, and I found myself standing in an empty room, staring at my own reflection in a cracked mirror. It hit me like a freight train. Jess wasn't real. She was a figment of my imagination, born from a need to escape my mundane life. The figure in the park had been a manifestation of my own fears, my own loneliness. I stumbled back, my heart racing with the realization that I had been chasing something that never existed. As I stood there, the weight of the truth crashed over me. I had been so desperate to connect, to find something more in my life, that I had conjured a perfect illusion. But the illusion shattered, leaving me alone in the quiet of my own mind, with only the echoes of what could have been. I turned away from the mirror, the the reflection of Jess fading into the depths of my own psyche, leaving me to confront the darkness within. It all started with a simple scroll through Tinder one Friday night, my thumb flicking through faces like I was flipping through an old magazine. Most profiles were just the usual, overly filtered selfies, guys flexing in gym mirrors, or holding fish they clearly didn't catch. But then I stumbled upon his profile. Jake's smile was warm, genuine, and the way he described himself was refreshing. He was into hiking, photography, and he had a dog named Rufus. Something about him seemed different. I swiped right, hoping for some banter, maybe a date. We matched almost instantly, and the conversation took off. He was funny and charming, and we talked for hours about everything. Our favorite movies, childhood memories, and our mutual love for the outdoors. As the night wore on, I found myself smiling at my phone, feeling a connection I hadn't felt in a long time. Jake suggested we meet up for a hike the following weekend. I hesitated for a moment, considering the usual horror stories of blind dates gone wrong, but he seemed trustworthy. Plus, who could resist a hiking trip? The morning of our date arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves and excitement. I dressed casually in my favorite hiking gear and made sure to pack plenty of water and snacks. As I drove to the trailhead, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I noticed a dark car following a bit too closely. It could have been nothing, but I felt a chill creep up my spine. I dismissed it as paranoia and focused on the upcoming adventure. When I arrived at the trailhead, Jake was already there, leaning against his car, a backpack slung over one shoulder. He waved enthusiastically, and my nerves settled a bit. We exchanged greetings and set off on the trail, chatting and laughing as we walked. The scenery was breathtaking. Towering trees formed a canopy overhead, and the air was crisp and fresh. I felt alive, free, and thrilled to be outdoors. As we hiked deeper into the woods, the atmosphere shifted. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating a dappled pattern on the ground. But the deeper we went, the more the shadows seemed to grow. Jake pointed out interesting plants and shared stories about his past hikes. I admired his passion, but I couldn't shake this gnawing feeling in my gut that something was off. It wasn't Jake. He was still charming, but the forest felt different, almost alive in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. We reached a clearing that opened up to a breathtaking view of the valley below. With the sun beginning to set, the sky was painted in hues of orange and purple. We took a moment to soak it all in, and I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. But that peaceful feeling was short-lived. As we stood there, I noticed something moving in the trees behind us. It was subtle, but it felt deliberate, like someone was watching us from the shadows. Jake didn't seem to notice, engrossed in his camera as he snapped photos of the landscape. I wanted to say something, but the words were lodged in my throat, a mix of anxiety and disbelief. I forced myself to look back at the view, trying to shake the unsettling feeling. I suggested we head back, and he agreed, though he seemed a bit reluctant. As we made our way down the trail, the woods grew darker, the shadows lengthening, and the air seemed to thicken. I could hear the crunch of leaves beneath my feet, but the silence around us was deafening. It felt like we were the only two people in the world, and the isolation began to weigh heavily on me. I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that clung to me like a second skin. Suddenly, I heard it, a rustling sound coming from the bushes off to the side. My heart raced, and I instinctively grabbed Jake's arm. He turned, his expression curious but calm, as if I was overreacting. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself it was just a rabbit or some other harmless creature. But the sound persisted, and I felt the urge to run. Jake noticed my unease and tried to reassure me, but his voice faded into the background as my instincts kicked in. I suggested we pick up the pace, and he nodded, though I could see a flicker of concern cross his face. We moved faster, but the feeling of being watched intensified, as if eyes were boring into my back. The rustling got louder, and I could have sworn I heard whispers, faint and disembodied. Panic set in. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking behind the trees. But there was nothing, just shadows that danced in the fading light. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Was I imagining things? I couldn't tell if it was the fear of the dark woods or something more sinister. As we rounded a bend in the trail, Jake suddenly stopped. I looked back at him, and his expression had changed, a strange mix of excitement and something darker. He pointed ahead, and I followed his gaze. There, nestled among the trees, was an old, dilapidated cabin. It looked abandoned, with vines creeping up the walls and a roof that sagged like it was about to collapse. My heart raced. This was not the kind of adventure I signed up for. I felt a tug of fear, but Jake's eyes sparkled with curiosity. He wanted to explore. I hesitated, the urge to turn back battling against the thrill of discovery. But he was so excited, and I didn't want to appear scared. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. As we approached the cabin, the air grew colder, and I felt a sense of foreboding settle over me. The door creaked open when Jake pushed it, revealing a dark interior filled with dust and the smell of decay. The floorboards groaned under our weight as we stepped inside. I scanned the room, taking in the cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and the broken furniture scattered about. It felt like a scene from a horror movie, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Jake moved further inside, snapping pictures of the hauntingly beautiful decay. I lingered by the doorway, my instinct screaming at me to leave. That's when I noticed the walls. They were covered in what looked like strange symbols and drawings, some kind of bizarre script I didn't recognize. My heart raced as I took a step back, feeling the weight of unease pressing down on me. Suddenly, I heard a soft thud from the back of the cabin. It sounded like someone, or something, was moving around. I glanced at Jake, who was too engrossed in his photography to notice. My heart pounded in my chest as fear surged through me. I wanted to scream at him to get out, but the words wouldn't come. That's when it hit me. The creeping dread, the feeling of being watched, the strange rustling in the woods, the whispers. They all pointed to something sinister lurking just beyond sight. I turned to leave, but as I stepped backward, I bumped into something solid. I spun around, and there, standing in the shadows of the cabin, was a figure. It was a woman, dressed in tattered clothing, her hair matted and wild. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mix of fear and desperation. She raised a hand, almost pleading, and I felt a chill grip my heart. I stumbled back, my instincts urging me to run. But before I could react, Jake turned around, his expression shifting from curiosity to confusion. The woman's gaze locked onto him, and suddenly, everything changed. She lunged forward, and I barely registered the scream that tore through the cabin. Before I could process what was happening, Jake's face twisted into a grin, an expression so foreign it made my stomach churn. He turned to me, and in that moment, I realized the truth. The charming guy I had met on Tinder wasn't who I thought he was. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that echoed in my mind, and I felt the walls closing in. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The last thing I saw was Jake's eyes, cold, calculating, and filled with a darkness I couldn't comprehend. The weight of the cabin pressed down on me, the air thick with malevolence. In that moment I understood. I wasn't just a girl on a date. I was part of something far more sinister,